there, it's Jer. I'm Jer Stays, and this is your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, July 6th, 2022. Today, we're covering a couple of topics. First off, should Belle Isle have a carless day? Should cars be restricted a bit on Belle Isle to make it better for people to enjoy the nature? Something we will discuss. Plus, Macomb County may be on the verge, if they don't take care of some procedural issues, of losing transit service altogether. Help sort it out, Dave Gifford, Transit Guide Detroit, and we will jump into it after I mention that we are supported by our members at patreon.com/dailydetroit. Thank you so much for helping us stay on the air. Joining me virtually, Dave Gifford, Transit Guide Detroit, all things transit for a little bit of transit talk. It's good to talk to you, sir.
You too, Jared. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Now, there's a few different stories I want to hit. First off, you've got a petition together that I thought was interesting to talk about. On the news that there is now a shuttle that is going to run from the fountain to the Belle Isle Conservancy. If you go on the island on Belle Isle, the DNR is, kind of shrinking roads in different places, trying to do different things. You've put out an interesting petition to at least sometimes make Belle Isle car-free. That's an interesting thought. Where did you come up with this?
After there was that horrific crash last month, that triggered a lot of responses of ban cars from Belle Isle. We should have a car-free Belle Isle at all times. And because of our dependence on cars, it's just, and our lack of good alternatives for transportation right now to the island, it's just not plausible. But my thought was, if we did a car-free day on a weekday once a month, that would do a couple things. One, it would make a safe environment for people, families, people young and old, to be able to access the island free from cars, so they could actually use the streets like people used to 100 years ago, and walk around and breathe clean air and be away from all the, we're faced with cars everywhere we go. And just to have one day a month that we could actually get out there and just not have to worry about looking both ways when we cross and be able to just access the entire island in its true form.
When we think about this, though, I also think of the history of Belle Isle in that I think there's a lot of myths about it, and I think there's a lot of perceptions around it because, people only live so long. They don't think about how a place used to be. Why don't we talk a little bit about those myths? I think one of them is about the design of the island.
A lot of people attribute the design of the island to Frederick Law Olmsted, who was the landscape architect of Central Park in New York. It was actually 20 years after he designed Central Park that he was hired by Detroit to come over. And apparently he chose that he was going to do this free of charge as long as the city covered his expenses. And after 5 years of being in Detroit and proposing his plan and talking to various city leaders and developers, he sent them a bill and they actually refused to pay it. So he ended up just quitting this altogether. His original thought, though, was that he wanted Belle Isle to be as natural as possible, keep the prairies untouched, keep as much woods as you can, and he just kind of had a central avenue, which is actually Central Avenue still. That's one of the only things that they were actually incorporated in the plan, as well as a nature loop through the trees and a dock for the ferry to come, because at the time there was no bridge. That wasn't built for another 10 years. So in the earliest days, you could only get to Belle Isle by private boat or by ferry from downtown.
How did the design actually come together? Because there's so many of those, man-made canals, things like that. When I talk to people about Belle Isle, I remind them that the plan that was chosen is heavily, man-made influenced.
Oh, sure. It's kind of like the everybody having their say. They thought his plan was too expensive, and I think it was a newspaper reporter or someone that actually had some ideas, and they decided to run with that. In the early days, they thought, well, we need to make this profitable. We need to figure out a way to, get as much as we can out of this park, because it's not like city real estate where they're extracting wealth from manufacturing or extracting money from rent. So it was just a large city park, and they needed to have money to provide services on the island. So they opened up, they established leases for different things like concession stands and rentals for boats and rentals for skates in the winter, and they put a lot into the island. It was kind of most of the development happened in the early 1900s, including extending the island to the west once they received the entire fortune from John Scott to build a fountain in his honor, and that was a whole controversy in itself.
Right. Whereabouts was that, where the island originally was, and what's the extension?
The extension is actually where the fountain starts.
Okay.
There's the paddock in that whole area. That around that area is where the extension started. So I forget the exact amount of acreage, but it's quite a few that they added to the island. And mostly that was infill from excavating things downtown Detroit.
Interesting. So if you go to the Belle Isle today and go to the fountain, that point on is all add-on since what, the 1920s?
Since the 20s, yep.
Wow. That's a really recent addition comparatively. That's like 100 years.
Oh, sure. Another thing people don't really realize about Belle Isle is that it actually had a transit system dating back to 1909. Back before they had a Department of Transportation for roads, it was the Department of City Parks and Roads. And they established a route for employees of the park and for people visiting. So they had Packard buses that would go from Jefferson across the bridge and around the island. And that actually stayed around for several decades. Over the years, they incorporated it into different city bus routes. And then they stopped altogether. I think back in 2016, they stopped the bus route, but then they brought it back as the current Conant bus route, which runs once an hour.
You know, reading some of the feedback from the announcement of that shuttle on the island, the number one thing listeners were saying was, why aren't we doing a shuttle from the city? Like, the shuttle to the island sounds great and all, but if you actually want to reduce car congestion, you need a shuttle regular service that goes from somewhere off the island and on. And then on the Friday episode of the podcast, you know, Devin mentioned the ferry. I'm actually one of the few people who've actually taken a ferry, because during the Grand Prix a few years ago, and I mentioned this on the air, the ferry ran from downtown over to the police dock, which the infrastructure was just tore up for that. And so it didn't continue.
Oh, sure.
But it's a valid point to say, well, shouldn't we have something that comes from, you know, the mainland and over if we really want to reduce car traffic on the island?
So one of the best examples of getting people from downtown to the island is during the Grand Prix. They run several hundred bus trips between downtown at the Renaissance Center and then on the Grand Prix and back. And they're actually free all weekend, which is great. You know, you have over 65,000 parking spaces downtown Detroit, and people can drive there, park, and then get to the island. So the island can actually hold a lot more people than the current 3,500 car capacity limit that they have. It's just a matter of having frequent transit and a mode shift in the way people think about getting places. You know, here in Metro Detroit, we think, I'm going to drive to my destination, park, and I'm there. But this would require a second step, which a lot of people aren't used to.
I hear the Grand Prix is moved downtown, and I understand the criticism of it. But one thing I will point out is people will say, hey, how do they fit so many people on the island? People literally do not realize that every single car adds so much more space. And the limit is not the number of people on the island. The limit is the number of cars. And yes, there's the state-imposed limit, but there's also the physical space limit of when you have one car and one or two people, you're going to eat up a ton of space and create a ton of congestion for an island that wasn't designed for cars.
Oh, sure. I've heard arguments saying that, well, you know, Belle Isle was designed for cars. Well, it actually wasn't. It was designed long before cars even existed. And it's been modified for cars over the years. And we've lost a lot of space that people normally inhabited. I was looking at an old aerial photo and some just of the island back in the day when, you know, cars were still new and young. But, you know, there was tons of landscaping and places for people to sit and walk, and people walked more because they didn't feel, well, the space was there. They had the budget for the landscaping, but they also didn't feel compelled to drive everywhere all the time because there were other options. There was a regular streetcar in Jefferson that got people there. And that's another interesting note. When the current MacArthur Bridge was built in 1923, the city voted, they put it to a vote to install streetcar tracks on it. And they actually passed it, and they built the streetcar tracks. So there was a double set of tracks on the east side of the bridge. So of those 5 current lanes, the 2 on the right side or on the east side were tracks. But nothing was ever started on that. The manager of the Parks and Boulevards Department thought that there'd be too much congestion between the people and the cars and the streetcars on there, which is kind of funny. Like, well, wouldn't the streetcars cause less congestion if they were moving more people at once than a car could?
I always remind people, you know, you travel places, you travel to other cities, and you have a wonderful dinner out on the patio, or you're like, oh, you know, there's this great streetcar example, or there's all these amenities you see in other cities. We could have them all here in Metro Detroit if we chose to. Mm-hmm. Like, it is just it's about an active decision. All of the things that you say, oh, hey, I go here, I enjoy this while I travel, they could all be here. You know, Detroit was known as the Paris of the Midwest for a reason, mm-hmm. and we could make the active choice to have Detroit be that wonderful and all of Metro Detroit be that wonderful for us all the time.
Oh, sure. And just another quick note about a car-free day once a month. I obviously know we couldn't do this on the weekends. There's way too many family reunions and people going there for picnics and barbecues, and that requires vehicles to move all that equipment and all the food and all the decorations and tables and everything that people bring with them. There's just no way that could really work on the weekends. I know that, but it could have a strong chance, like on a Wednesday or Thursday, provided there's programming, like a kind of Open Streets Detroit level programming of things to do and activities and like yoga and things for kids to do and bikes to ride and just different things like that. And getting the bicycle group, there's tons of bicycle groups in Detroit that do weekly rides, and many actually do them out to Belle Isle and back on different nights. So if you can include all those people, especially the people of Detroit, because this is, I have this kind of an outsider view since I live in Warren, but I do go to the park. I mean, it's something that regionally we all use, and even though it is really Detroit's park, but I think if we involve the people of Detroit in this decision, so they don't feel like this is just some outsider saying, "Hey, we should make car-free day," and everybody says, "Well, I use my car, I need to get there." But if you create other ways to get there, like improving the transit service and do more advertising and actually make a plan for this, I think it has a real chance.
There is a petition for this on change.org. I will put a link to the show notes if you want to search for it. It's simply labeled Car-Free Day on Belle Isle. All right, let's get into a little bit more of the hard transit news, in that the county of Macomb may have a real issue in continuing SMART, the suburban bus system service, because of a technicality. And now that technicality has been tripped, there's a real question of what's going to happen to get this on the ballot to fund SMART. I mean, what is going on, David?
Well, every 4 years, the county commissioners have to put it to a vote whether or not to renew the SMART millage. SMART has the option to increase the millage if they want more funding, but currently we've been staying with the status quo number. I think it's under at 1 mil right now. So every 4 years they have to renew it, and they have to put it to a vote. And a couple members of the council were actually absent, and there's a question as far as whether or not, even though they did approve it narrowly, if it's valid. So at this point, they're saying that it's not valid and that the millage will not be on the ballot in November.
And Macomb is an all-in county, which means it's a county-wide vote, unlike Oakland, where it's individual municipalities that vote and negotiate.
Sure, Oakland and Wayne County, they have opt-out cities like Livonia and some of these, in Rochester Hills. Some of these cities are so big, they're a 36 square mile township-sized city, and that really hampers the ability for people to either pass through by transit or even get to all the jobs that are there. I remember when Rochester Hills held a job fair and they closed it early due to lack of attendance. And I thought, well, they have no transit for people to get there to try to apply for these jobs.
Yeah, especially, jobs of different levels. If you want to bring people into work at your business, you need them a way to get there. I will note that the clock is ticking. The deadline is 4 p.m. on August 16th to get this on the November ballot. And there definitely are some issues. And one of the issues, and I think there's, kind of like a opposition mobilizing against this on the Republican side. I think a lot of people in Macomb County view transit as only something for seniors. They don't think about, say, the fast Gratiot route and that's the most popular fast route in the SMART system. They don't think about that. And they don't think about other things. So why don't you kind of lay the stakes out for Macomb County if this doesn't happen and the impact?
Oh, sure. I'm envisioning two possible scenarios: that either they don't get it on the ballot and SMART services end in Macomb by the end of 2022, or they do get it on the ballot and by chance it passed so narrowly last time, and if by chance it doesn't pass and service ends in 2022, it'd be devastating for multiple things in Macomb County. Everything from employers that would lose tons of employees that would be stranded. When I used to work in Romeo, I commuted up Van Dyke every day, and on the way home you would just see groups of people at every bus stop waiting to get home on the Van Dyke bus, knowing they had to get the 8 Mile, walk across the street, and then get on the Van Dyke bus on that side to get home. So all those people would be out of luck trying to get to work. And then you also have all the retail centers that rely on transit riders as customers. I think I saw a figure a few years ago that Detroiters spend something like $1 billion in the suburbs every year because they don't have a lot of those same stores and services within the city. So they would lose out on a lot of that money too. if they didn't have customers coming in, that they couldn't get there.
I'll also mention, too, that a lot of people used to say in the last transit rounds, debates about this, that, oh, just pick up Uber, pick up Lyft instead. And although there is a Smart Flex service, which, by the way, you would need Smart Millage in order to get, right? Because Smart is trying to do some on-demand stuff that is kind of interesting.
Oh, they're talking about putting that county-wide as well, because currently it's only by certain zones, and the purpose is to get people within the zone, but also to get them to transit stops within those zones that are on the border of them. So they're talking about making that go county-wide, which they can't do if there's no funding for it.
Well, and that gets to the truth underneath Lyft and Uber. All those cheap rides for so many years were funded by venture capitalists. When people had the discussion the last time we talked about transit, oh, just rely on Uber and Lyft, the only reason that they were competitively affordable was a massive subsidy from venture capitalists, and that has ended. If you've taken those rides lately, the prices are way up. And so a great way to provide that subsidy for a very affordable price would be to support a service like it with Smart instead of trusting venture capitalists that eventually want to make their money and make a profit.
Oh, sure. Yeah, anyone that's tried taking Uber or Lyft has seen that there's two problems. The prices have gone way up. And the other problem is the lack of drivers. We've had a very big human problem losing employees through COVID. And if you look at the difference in rates, the Flex microtransit, it's more of like an Uber pool where you might be riding with other people, but rides they start at $2 and they max out at $8. I mean, you're never going to see that on Uber or Lyft. You're paying $40, $60, $80 for a ride depending on how far you're going.
Well, then, as I understand it, too, it's going to be more of a situation where you have people at the ready to actually take you places as opposed to the kind of catch-as-catch-can system that Uber and Lyft employ.
Oh, certainly.
Dave Gifford, it's always good to talk to you. Where can people find you on the internet?
On Twitter at Transit Guide DET or on Transit Guide Detroit, my website and Instagram.
And we are done for today. A couple of coming attractions. I know we will have a segment with Fletcher Sharp talking about the game that I am literally getting ready to go to with Detroit City FC versus Hartford and looking forward to Indy 11 over the weekend. Plus, Devin O'Reilly will join us virtually to talk about a whole bunch of stories that you don't want to miss. All right, with that, I'm Jared Stays. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and I'll see you around Detroit.